My name is Rachel Rofe. I created this show because I wanted to help you see that if you have a choice, you can choose a better life. If you're listening to this podcast, you're in a pretty fortunate position. You have free will, ability to connect to the internet, and access to all kinds of new education. This podcast is meant to help you make the most of your good fortune. We talk with all kinds of people here from all walks of life because I want you to see that no matter what your situation, there's always a way to create a life that you're proud of. Hello everyone, today we're here with Antonia and Joel Witt. They are co-owners of Personality Hacker, an organization designed to help people leverage their own mental processes to optimize productivity, communication, job satisfaction, and most importantly, happiness. They are internet entrepreneurs that have a 2-year-old daughter together, and Joel has 2 sons from a previous marriage. Both have experience in juggling their own businesses and raising small children. So thank you guys for being here.
Thank you, Rachel.
Thanks, Rachel.
Yeah, totally. So the intention behind A Better Life is to show people that if they have a choice, that they can choose a better life. So in that spirit, can you take a minute to just brag and share with us some of the things that you're most proud of in your life right now?
That's a good question because it kind of forces us, I didn't think about that before, but it forces us to celebrate some of the good stuff that we've done, things that we're proud of. I think that's a great question.
Yeah.
We have really done a lot. I've co-owned Personality Hacker for about 4 years now, and Joel bought out my previous business partner. And so it's almost like we have sort of started a new business on the legs of the previous one. And so in the last year, we've really started rocking and rolling on a lot of the stuff that, we had a foundation for before, but it feels like it's really hitting a level of thriving now. And we started our own podcast, which has become pretty popular in a very short amount of time, which is awesome. And it's become we are no longer in the struggling mode of being online entrepreneurs, which is great because it's difficult for people to get through that struggle, that feast or famine, that sort of starving artist mode in an internet business. And we feel really good that we've accomplished that. We stuck with it enough to get through that. And now we're in a really good place in our business. Not only that, but in the last few years, I was able to be part of running a TEDx in Las Vegas. It was called TEDx Sin City, which was a great success, and that was really fun. I feel like we've also been able to leverage the understanding that we have about how human beings work, a lot of maps and models to increase just the overall happiness in our lives. Joel and I have a really fantastic marriage, and that's something that I think I'm probably most proud of anything. That, doing all these different things, running events, having an online business, raising small children, the combination of all of it can be something that it feels very heavy and it feels very difficult to, maintain working on the relationship. And I think the thing that I'm most proud of is that through all of this, we're able to leverage some of that stuff that we teach and actually implement it in our lives so that we have a really good, thriving relationship.
I would second that. I think that the thing I would be most proud of, Rachel, would be also, you went into the personal relationship stuff, and that's what I was going to say, because it's like you can build a business, you can have a kind of a good business life, but if your home life is kind of terrible, if you're fighting all the time, and not that we don't have our disagreements and stuff, but I'm very proud that we have these moments when we might have some difficulties, because we work together, we live together, we're in a romantic relationship, we're married, we have a child together, I have 2 kids, and it's like we're able to kind of work through some of that. So I'm really proud of us as a couple, I think.
Yeah, that's a really big deal because I know even doing business alone could just be a huge passion flasher, but then you throw in all those other things in the mix. It's really a testament to how well you guys are able to just relate and also to the amazing personality profiling that you do. And I forgot to mention when I was introducing you guys, but for people listening, Joel and Antonia are both amazing at personality profiling and just meeting people and learning exactly how they work. So what their natural strengths are, what they work to overcome, and then just how they can relate in all areas of life. And they teach it. I've enrolled in their classes before, and it's just awesome, awesome stuff. I know that you guys did not just wake up and get to where you are now. I know from knowing you guys, you've worked hard. And so can you describe maybe a particularly notable time in your life when you felt like things weren't going the way that you wanted, or maybe you felt trapped in what was going on then?
Yeah. For me, it was just right before I actually met Antonia. I'd been living in another city away from my family. I had been going through some separation and divorce from my previous wife, and I had 2 small children. I was a single dad living in an apartment kind of in the inner city, working full time and struggling to try to make an internet business go. This was several years ago, probably 5 years ago now. and feeling kind of like a decision point of, I really want to not live a templatized life. I want to make something happen in my life that's a little bit unique and a little bit different, and give myself some freedom and some flexibility so that I can live with passion and purpose. You know, a lot of times people think it's the business training that's going to make the deciding factor for you. For me, obviously the business training was important. I got some really good training, but it was the personal development work I did, the personal work in myself, the person I was becoming and changing to be, and giving myself permission to be a new type of person. And then literally almost overnight, I know that, the success came later, but overnight things started happening immediately. Like once I gave myself that permission, the world started opening up. Within a month, I had met the woman I was going to eventually end up marrying and falling in love with and having a baby with. I ended up leaving the city I was in, quitting my job, going into internet business full time, meeting a bunch of new and cool people, spending some time in different places. It was an eye-opening experience for me to give myself personal permission.
So what do you mean when you say, like, what did you tell yourself to give yourself permission?
Yeah, so I was doing a lot of reading of like Anthony Robbins type material. I'd actually gone to a couple of Eben Pagan's events, personal development events and business events. One of the things that I decided to give myself permission around was this idea that I didn't have to be every day what I'd already been the day before. In other words, when I got up that morning, I gave myself permission, and it was a phrase I had in my mind of give yourself permission to not be yourself, or to be not me. It's kind of how I phrased it. And it allowed me to kind of answer the question, well, if I was going to do this, how would I go about it? Whatever it was. So, for example, like the day I met my future wife, Antonia, I was at a conference in Los Angeles where we had met. And I was, I kind of came from a conservative background, conservative family. And at the time I was separated from my wife. We'd been separated for a long time, and we were going to be, eventually headed for divorce. We knew that. It just had not finalized itself. But I gave myself permission at that event to begin to explore a relationship with a new person, like immediately. Like I wasn't like, well, I've got to go on like 20 dates. Immediately, I allowed myself to rush into something that in the past I would have been very reserved about. And I remember, allowing myself to go up to people and introduce myself to people where I'd be maybe shy or like a little bit nervous. Like these people are high profile or they've been big business people. And I'm like, hey, I'm Joel. And I'd reach out, I'd shake their hand, and I was very friendly. And I still felt really weird and kind of insecure about myself, but I was willing to put myself out there. So that was one big decision I made personally in giving myself permission.
So when you were saying like you gave yourself permission to do things that the old you wouldn't have done, did you think about like the type of person that you wanted to be? Or I guess what was the reference point for going through and talking to people? Do you know what I mean?
Looking back, I personally don't remember exactly if I had a plan like who I wanted to be. I think I had more of an away from motivation at the time. I was like, this is who I really don't want to be. I guess the question was, I remember sitting down with a guy who was walking me through kind of this exercise. I was talking about, I've got my 2 children in the city I live in, and I feel like it limits me. And I remember him asking the question, well, what would happen if you didn't think you had the limit? What would you do? And I remember answering his question, I would probably move out of town. I'd probably go explore more business opportunities. And he's like, well, what's stopping you? I'm like, I can't do that. I can't leave the town I live in because I've got a job, I've got responsibilities. And I remember him saying, well, what would happen if you could do that? What would your life look like? And he began to kind of future pace. I guess in that moment, I was starting to future pace of what I could accomplish and what I could become different, and kind of opening up my mind to say, well, this is interesting. Maybe it's not a bad thing to make these choices, because we assume that we have the outcome clearly defined in our mind. We'll make a choice. Well, if I make this choice, this consequence is going to happen, or this result is going to happen. And from my experience and kind of just taking a leap of faith, that actually isn't really the case from my personal experience. So it was a little bit more of a way from motivation, but at the moment that I kind of made this decision, it was like a toward motivation to live a life of excitement. And I think you teach about this, Rachel. It's like it's a feeling you go after more than even a thought. It's like, how did I want to feel when I made some choices? And I like how you phrase that a lot of times. It was more about a feeling I wanted more than a specific business or a specific city I lived in. It was a feeling of freedom, a feeling of being able to fully be authentic to who I am and not have to live a template that other people set up for me.
I love that. The reason why I love even like going after a feeling versus maybe like a thought or a specific thing is because it's so much easier to live a life right now that you're really happy about if you're just chasing a feeling, because you can do so many things to feel excited right here in this moment,
Yeah, exactly.
That's awesome. And what about you, Antonia? Do you have any times that you remember? It could be like just anything in your life or maybe something with you guys together, whatever comes to your mind about something where you felt trapped, because I think it's just so helpful for people to see that people can have some amazing brag-worthy things to talk about right now, but then also like the real people. And of course, they've had things in the past that they've had to overcome.
Yeah. Well, I kind of see my life as like a perpetual cycle of being stuck and then working through and coming out the other side and then feeling awesome for a while and then like sort of driving to the next feeling of stuck and then, and then working through it and then coming out the other side and feeling awesome. And then, I mean, I think if you choose to scale up, if you choose to continue to challenge yourself, like once you climb to the next precipice, then you look at the next climb up and you're like, oh, that's right, I'm not done. And so a lot of times just having gone through a time period of scaling up, having gone through a time period of like putting more pressure, I call it putting pressure through the pipe, exposes all the cracks. And so there's been, I can think of a lot of time periods where, it's the next scale up opportunity that's put more pressure through me. And so a lot more cracks were exposed. And it's oftentimes the cracks that feel like those are my stuck points. Like, oh gosh, I'm not perfect. Look at all my imperfections. What am I going to do now? And then, of course, I've spent some time working on those cracks, working on the imperfections, or maybe even just the vulnerabilities, and either making peace with them or patching them up in some way, and then recognizing that I'm actually ready for the next big opportunity. But I would say that probably the biggest example of this is when I graduated from the paradigm that I was raised in. I was raised in an extremely religious family that had very, very, very narrow definitions of what was an acceptable life. And part of that particular paradigm is that if you leave, you don't get to take anyone or anything with you. When I was reaching a level of, what I would call cognitive dissonance, or my realization that I wasn't buying into that particular paradigm anymore, I realized that if I left, I would basically be leaving my family and all of my network of friends behind. And it took me literally years to make the decision because, that's part of why paradigms set themselves up like that. They allow the social pressure to do a lot of their work for them. Like if you leave and nobody will talk to you anymore, then that's a pretty big incentive to stay. But I got to a point of not being able to live with the dissonance anymore. Like the need to be true to myself, the need to be honest, intellectually honest with myself was bigger than my need to keep all of those relationships. The pain of being intellectually dishonest was worse than the pain of leaving everybody behind. Like I said, it literally took me years. It probably took me 3 or 4 years of trying to figure out a workaround. And when I got to a point where I realized that there just wasn't a workaround anymore, then I left. And when I left, I literally left behind all of my relationships. My parents ended their relationship with me, and I'd been pretty close with them growing up. None of my friends talked to me anymore, and I had some extremely close friends. And that was just the choice I had to make. And so then it was a matter of now rebuilding a lot of things that I had that was basically established over a lifetime. You make all your good friends maybe in your late teenage years, and here I was in my late 20s, early 30s, and I didn't have any friends. I didn't know anybody. And you build a bedrock of reliance on family members, and your parents helped get you through some tough times, and then that was just gone. So I had to rebuild my life. One thing about it was that it was very freeing. I didn't have any expectations on me, so I could recreate whatever I wanted to. And a part of it was kind of that, they call it the blank canvas syndrome, which is I can do anything I want, and now there's too many choices. There's too many options. Then at the same time, I realized, well, then I can just kind of create magic if I want to. I can do anything I want to. So why on earth would I live the normal templatized life? I lived somebody else's template, which was not the same as most people. The religion I grew up in, the template for that religion is very different than the template that most people are familiar with. So I was already used to being fairly counterculture, but I wanted to live my own template. And so I started developing relationships and just doing things that I had heard my whole life that I couldn't do from, both my religious upbringing and also a secular point of view. You're not allowed to teach that if you don't have, say, a degree in that particular thing. And I just decided to ignore all that and just do whatever I wanted to. I was like, yeah, I'm just going to kind of do whatever the hell I want to and let's see what pans out. And it took a while and it was very painful. It was very difficult at the other side because I made the choice of intellectual honesty, because I made the choice to no longer live in cognitive dissonance, the only thing I really had was myself. I just had to maintain total faith in myself that I was going to be okay. Like, I was going to get through it and I was going to rely on my own resources. I'm going to be a lifelong learner and I'm just going to figure this out. And 5-6 years later, I have a stunning life. Like, I have basically the life that I had always wanted before and daydreamed about, but never thought I had permission to do. And now I'm just living it. I'm with somebody who, I hate the phrase soulmate, so I'm not going to use that term, but it's probably about the closest it's as close to accurate as anything. I have a beautiful daughter. You know, I have a great business that continues to do better and better, and I'm doing things that I continually do things that I do not have the skill level to do, if that makes sense. Like, I'm forever starting projects where I'm like, yeah, I have no idea how to do that. And then I just go do it, and then it just happens. And so I think that's probably why I feel it's sort of a perpetual cycle of being stuck, because I invariably bite off more than I can chew. And then I just have to kind of figure it out. So there's lots of moments of feeling stuck. There's lots of moments of feeling like I'm not going to be able to do this thing. And then somehow miraculously the universe just sort of provides. Yeah, I would say that that's probably my story of my biggest moment of sort of being the phoenix rising from the ashes.
Yeah, it's a gigantic story. I mean, that's just wild to be in this religion all your life. And then it just always boggles my mind every time I hear you talk about it. It's just to go and leave behind everybody that you've ever known and really just start from scratch. It's like, I would be terrified.
Yeah, it's a scary thing because we have really ancient programming in our minds that tell us that to be booted from the tribe equals death. So to willingly leave the tribe, right, and to go face predators alone and to go, sort of make your own way, we've lived in a time period where infrastructure allows us to do that for about 5,000 to 10,000 years. And we lived in a time period where that equaled death for like hundreds of thousands of years. So we have a lot of really ancient programming that says, yeah, if you do that, you're not going to be okay. And so to make that choice is you're fighting something that says, okay, that you're going to die now. So, all right, be ready for death. And what's awesome, though, is obviously my pain levels of cognitive dissonance were much greater than my fear of death, right? Like my instinctive old programming fear of death. So there was an incentive for me. I didn't just do it because I'm this amazing superhuman person. I did it because the pain wasn't worth it anymore. And so I had to. There wasn't really any choice. The choice was already made for me. It was just a matter of taking the first step. It's not really this amazing thing. It's more like it hurt really bad and I chose to walk away from the hurt. But that said, once you make an action, a massive, huge mushroom cloud behind you action that you do for yourself, right? Like you do because you have enough faith and you have enough self-love and you have enough desire to not be in pain anymore. Once you make that action, you get to a point where you're like, well, I mean, nobody can do anything to me because I just did the worst thing to myself that I could do. And I totally survived it. So it takes you out of that victim mentality and puts you totally into the creator mentality. Like, I get to create my destiny. What can anybody do to me that I haven't just done to myself? And that, I would say, possibly is one of the most empowering thoughts a person can have.
Yeah, I mean, once you wipe out worst case scenario, you can only go uphill.
Yeah, exactly.
And can you just touch for a second on, because you mentioned a couple of times there was the cognitive dissonance with your religion. So what exactly was that looking like to you? Was it just like you were seeing people do things in the religion that you just didn't agree with? Or how was it for you?
I don't think it was behavior as much as it was just purely mimetic. Like, I just didn't believe it anymore. Like, it just didn't make sense. And that's fine. There's lots of different paradigms and perspectives people have and lots of different religions, and they suit the needs of the people in it. But it wasn't working for me anymore. We run a company called Personality Hacker, and personality psychology is our bread and butter. Like, we talk about personality types. That's probably one of our biggest model of human development that we touch on, is a variety of different personality typologies. And in one of them, the basic premise is that there's a limited number of mental processes that we all can tap into, but there's one that's our favorite. And since I've left the religion of my youth, I've kind of done an informal study of people choosing religions based on personality type, who stays in what religion, how does that really work? And this is not formal, this is just purely observational. But I've noticed that if the religion offends that mental process, our favorite way of seeing reality, interacting with it, and it doesn't even have to offend it. Sometimes it just suppresses it. Like, certain religions are very freeing to certain personality types and very oppressive to others. And I've noticed that if the religion that you're in or grew up in or have chosen, or it doesn't even have to be religion, it could just be a paradigm. Like, it could just be, it could be
family business.
It could be the family business or a political, affiliation that your parents are very strongly attached to, or whatever it is. If it offends or suppresses that dominant mental process, it's only a matter of time. You're going to leave it because you cannot, a situation that suppresses that process, that mental process, is unbearable. So the cognitive dissonance that I was experiencing is probably in large part just a suppression of my dominant mental process. The part of me that I identify with the most was being massively suppressed. And that was the real pain. And my mind just kind of went, yeah, we need to go someplace else. Mm-hmm. We need to find a place that will celebrate this mental process and not one that continues to repress it.
So I feel like there's like 500 different directions we could go with this because there's so much that you guys know. One thing that I was thinking while you were talking that would be awesome because you know about all the different personality profiles. And I usually like to ask people kind of what were the mindset shifts that you made or the choices that you made to get from where you were to where you are now. And both of you touched on them. But maybe one thing that would be really helpful is if you can give a quick rundown, like super quick, just because I know there's so much to go over, but of the different personality profile, not necessarily what the types are, but just for each type, like what would be the mindset or shift that would be most empowering for them to get them out of a tough circumstance?
Yeah.
So basically go over everything we teach in like 5 minutes.
Yeah. Okay,
sure,
fine.
Rachel. No, I'm kidding.
Yeah, this is like 20 podcasts. Yeah, this is a lot of what we talk about.
This is good for us, though, because it forces us to articulate what we do in a very, kind of in a pithy format.
Dude, neither of us are pithy. We are the opposite of pithy. We are wordy folk.
Well, why don't you talk about kind of the preference of the two,
Sure.
And then I'll kind of give an overview, and then you can maybe...
Yeah.
That'd be the best we could do probably for this, Rachel.
That's great.
I like the truncated sentences. I'm like, yeah, sure. Okay, that sounds good. So let's put it down to its absolute most essential form. And let's put it down to something that's really super duper simple to digest. In one of the models that we teach, it stands on the legs of the Myers-Briggs system, which stands on the legs of what's considered Jungian psychology from the Swiss psychologist Carl Jung. And there's a certain set of personality types. In the Myers-Briggs system, there's 16. And each one of these 16 types, what defines them are these mental processes that are either dominant or supplementary to their dominant process. And a lot of people feel like they know Myers-Briggs if they understand what their 4-letter code is. What most people don't realize is that the 4-letter code is actually a decoder ring for your mental processes. They're technically called cognitive function. More complex and complicated than the standard Myers-Briggs that just kind of focuses on, say, introversion, extroversion, sensing, intuition, thinking, feeling, and judging and perceiving. Those 4 letters have in and of themselves quite a bit of information and content, which is why most people stick with them because they're accessible and easy to understand, and there's a lot there. What we like to do is we love chasing rabbits down trails and doing deep dives. And the mental processes, there are 8 in total, are the preferred way of interacting with reality for each of these 16 types. And it's the combination of which mental processes you're using, which are your dominant mental processes and what's called your secondary process. It's the combination of those two things that make your Myers-Briggs type. So just to make this super duper simple, some people lead with what's called an understanding mental process, and other people lead with what's called a decision-making mental process. Now, when I say is called, I mean by us because there's more technical names if you run into the same information other places. But these are about the most accessible and simple terms that we are familiar with, so we're going to use the easy ones because why be hard if you don't need to? Why be complicated if you don't need to? So anybody who's leading with a learning process interacts with the world in sort of more of a questioning frame. They enter a situation by asking a lot of questions and wanting to know more information. They're always trying to fuel that mental process that wants to know more because they're leading with learning. They have a tendency to have difficulty making decisions because that's not as fun for them as gathering more information. Getting into action is sometimes more difficult for them, or even if they're good at getting into action, getting into focused action, knowing where they're headed. A lot of times these people will just start doing and hope that where they're going will reveal itself to them. They're the ones who like to explore a lot more. And the other style are those who lead with a decision-making process. So when they enter a situation, they're entering it decisively. They're much better at making decisions. They're much better at sort of creating trim tabs for what the right action to do or to make is. And which one you lead with will oftentimes sort of inform what situations and circumstances that you are attracted to. Like, where do you like to end up? And so certain perspectives and paradigms, and by the way, there's 4 different kinds of learning styles. So there's 4 different ways that we learn, and we have a dominant of them, our favorite type. And those who lead with that learning process choose one of the 4, and that's their favorite way of learning and interacting with the world. And then those who lead with decision making, there's also 4 of those. So they've got one of those 4 as their favorite way of making decisions, or the criteria they're using to evaluate and make decisions. And so depending upon our learning style and whether or not we're leading with it, we'll stay in some context and leave others, right? Because it will appeal to that style of learning. Like take, for example, the religion I grew up in is very buttoned down. And I lead with the learning process. I lead with something that we call exploration. Well, exploration is all about trying new things. It's all about making messes, mistake with permission. It's all about a messy life in which a lot of information is pulled. And the context I was in is suppressive of that desire to do new things. So eventually my driver process, that process that's inside me, that is leading me, that I identify with the most, got really frustrated and had to break free. Now there's other learning styles that would be are very content in that frame, right? They learn the same thing over and over, and it reinforces a belief, and that feels good to them. And that's not necessarily saying that theirs is bad and mine is good. It's just that's how we work. That's how we're built to work. And then you've got decision-making people who are attracted to certain styles of infrastructure, certain perspectives and paradigms, ways of seeing reality based on their evaluation criteria. And so if it's making their decision-making process or their evaluation mechanism, if it's making that feel good, then they'll stay in certain contexts and leave others. It's nice to believe that we're all making completely, totally conscious choices on everything we do. The truth is that our makeup, our genetic makeup, our personality makeup, how we're just sort of hardwired, it makes a lot of our decisions for us because it determines what's a tolerable and an intolerable situation. It also helps determine what is an extremely ecstatically happy context and what is a miserable context. So if you understand how you operate, if you understand how your mind works, it's a lot easier to sort of create goals or what I call magnets in the middle of the field, like the thing that we're always trying to calibrate towards. It's a lot easier to design one of those that's suitable to your personality type. Because if you get to a point where you have this lofty goal and you discover it was based on somebody else, right? Like maybe you outsourced your goals, you outsourced them to a different personality type, and now you get there and now you're miserable, right? Because it wasn't really your goal, it was somebody else's goal for you. Knowing how you're hardwired will help prevent that sort of thing from happening. It will also help inform the map you create to get there. Like your personality type is going to gravitate towards certain activities and ways of going about things that other personality types would totally mess up, but you're excellent at doing it that way. So it helps inform the end game, and it also helps inform, the map you create to get to that end game. So I don't know if that was what you were asking, but that's probably as best as I could encapsulate it.
That's an awesome way of just explaining the types, and definitely it's so interesting to just hear about different types, and then once I know what people are, to be able to relate with them through their lens. It's just fascinating. I don't know if it's possible, but if it is there maybe a mindset or a one sentence kind of affirmation or something that a understanding and a decision-making type could say to themselves to navigate out of a situation that would be tough for them? Or is that too generic?
A lot of times the problems that we face are manufactured by ourselves anyway. That's been my observation. So a lot of times if somebody is at a sticking point, or if they're having, they're in a tough spot, sometimes it's circumstantial. Sometimes we've navigated ourselves into a place that's we got to get out of. We painted ourselves into a corner, or however you want to state it. Oftentimes, though, it's a mindset. We have decided that this is a problem. It's something that we determined was a problem, and now we're only seeing problems because we decided that it was a problem. And while this is not the cure-all, obviously, I would say that it's a massive leverage point. Joel was talking about permission earlier. When he gave himself permission to be not himself, that was a turning point for him.
A shift.
Yeah, it was a shift. And I think permission is one of those things that everybody needs, but doesn't know they needed it until they got it. And so it's a really tough thing to sell, but I think that most personal development, most of the work that, people like us do when we're teaching people is fundamentally we're trying to give them a sense of permission to be themselves, permission to see themselves as okay and not fundamentally broken, permission to rest into who they are. And it's almost impossible to articulate until the person experiences it. And then they go, oh my gosh, how have I lived my whole life without having permission to be me, right? Why have I been seeing myself as being sort of fundamentally broken this whole time? And that happens because we're not going to be surrounded, like our parents are probably not our personality type. And they probably don't have permission to be themselves. And then when they saw things in us that were different than them, they may have unconsciously, determined that that was a problem of some sort. And so then they unconsciously communicated that to us. And so we're raised with this idea that because we're different than our influencers or the people who are heroes in our life, then there must be something wrong or bad with me. And the reality is that, and I do this all the time. So, it's not like I'm not the final word, but I'm definitely not an inexpert word. All of the personality types, no matter what model that I'm using, all of them are needed in some way. Like every single one creates a perfect ecosystem of relationships, societies. Like we need them all. It's kind of like bees. Like if they die, we die. If one of those personality types is removed, the rest of us won't survive without them. However you're hardwired, whoever you are, and however your mind naturally works. Now, this doesn't include disorders or, if somebody is like a sociopath, we don't need the sociopaths. Not that I can see. But as far as just sort of your natural way of engaging with the world, how you learn information, how you make decisions, and how that informs how you see yourself, that's not just okay. That's precious and necessary. So resting into who you are is one of the biggest gifts that you don't just give to yourself, but you give to the world. Giving yourself permission to know that you're more than okay, that you're needed, is one of the greatest gifts that you can give to everybody around you. And now all that mental real estate and all that like energy that you're expending to fighting who you are can now be refunneled and repurposed into helping others, into playing a bigger game, into making a big difference and impact in the world. So I don't know how pithy that is, but just resting into how necessary you are and giving yourself permission to be that is one of the greatest gifts you can give to yourself and others.
And I would say, Rachel, a little bit more specific to your, not that Antonia didn't answer specifically to your question, but she did give a great answer just there, and I don't want to diminish that. But the one thing, I think it is a little bit complicated to give an overarching for somebody that's leading with a decision-making function or somebody that's leading with a learning function. What can they do if they're stuck or they're, a little bad way? Kind of an overall thing is once you know your personality type, if you do lead with the decision-making function, that means that there's going to be a part of your personality that also learns. And the thing that we really teach is to get into a growth position of your personality. And that usually involves the second process that you favor, which is going to be a little different than your first process that will actually grow you as a person. It's hard to go over all 16 personality types right now and tell you what each one of those would be. But just know that once you understand this and unlock it, that's really where you can grow and begin to develop personal development through that.
Yeah, there's a yin to your yang, and knowing your yang and your yang is really important.
Yeah, what she said.
Yeah.
And we don't want to see either.
Yeah.
Don't show us your yin or your yang.
Yeah. So kind of knowing the structure of your personality type and then giving attention to the part of you that might be going a little ignored is often very high leverage for getting through challenges.
I would say the biggest thing that I've taken away from this, like if I only had like 2 minutes to tell somebody something about personality types, I would probably just say, look, the biggest thing to understand is that just because your mind learns and makes decisions the way it doesn't mean everybody thinks like you do. If you can just hold space for other people, and if they do something that just makes no sense to you at all, or just seems crazy or silly, ask yourself, I wonder if they're just a different personality type. I wonder if that's what's going on here. I mean, that would be what I'd tell people. Like, if I had a minute to tell them something, would you agree? Is that kind of something I don't know if you have another minute to give somebody, but that'd be my minute to give.
I think I've observed that when people give themselves permission to be themselves, they unconsciously give everybody else permission to be themselves too. So I usually focus on the pithy statement of accept who you are and accept your type and accept how you're hardwired. Because I think that when somebody really integrates that, when they really nail that part, then it's very easy for them to start giving everybody else permission to be themselves. But yes, I would say that is definitely an end result that improves the happiness, the overall happiness of yourself and everybody around you.
Those are both phenomenal pieces of advice. So they're great, and I think they build on each other really nicely. So awesome. I'm so excited that people are going to hear this. I think it's going to be really helpful for them. And we could totally go through this whole entire podcast and have so much to talk about and never talk about what we were originally going to talk about, which is totally awesome. But I also think you have such amazing knowledge around running a business and stuff and having a child. So I'd love to just quickly touch on that too, to make sure that people get to hear about that awesomeness too. So for that, can you just talk about when you had your daughter, how did that impact your business?
Oh my gosh. It was like, talk about mushroom clouds. Like it was nuclear. I was 34 when, I always say knocked up. I know that that's such a crude term, but I always say I got knocked up. When I got pregnant with my loving husband, I was 34 years old and I had actually never anticipated having children. But I think my biology was like really barking for it because it happened. And I'm like, how did this happen? As if I hadn't spent 14 years preventing it. So it happened and it was like, oh gosh. And that was actually during a time period where we were still in very much building the business. Like everything feels so nice and cozy now, not everything's handled. It's still a challenge. It's not what it was then. Then I was like, I think I can't do this anymore. Like I really believed that when I got pregnant and had Piper, I was like, that's it. It's done. Like you're going to have to go get a day job and I'm going to have to, do transcription online or something and it's over. And that's really the mindset I came from. I was like, I just can't do it. I just cannot juggle all this. And
you had some beliefs around this beforehand.
Oh man, I had such massive beliefs. And that's really what fucked me up. I'm sorry. I can't remember whether or not I was supposed to swear, but it was my beliefs more than my logistics that were the issue. Because 2 years later, Piper just turned 2 on Sunday. And 2 years later, I'm like, oh no, that is totally doable. That is manageable. And I've seen how it can be manageable. But I didn't have any real understanding of how to do it. So it was a lot of trial and error. I mean, it definitely it stunted the growth of the business for sure. I'm pretty sure that if I had to figure out from scratch how to run a business with a child, the success that we're experiencing now probably would have happened quite a bit before this.
Well, it's kind of like a business itself is like a child. It needs tons of attention. It needs to be watched. It's got to be nurtured and fed and like cared for. And I mean, it's kind of like you're raising 2 children at that point.
Yeah, exactly.
That each want their own time.
Yeah. So that was the belief I had, was that it couldn't happen. And I had to get over me. I had to get over my belief. And then once I got over my belief, or maybe it just sort of happened because it was kind of like that thing where I had cognitive dissonance about my previous paradigm. I tried to ignore it and then eventually it just wouldn't go away. And that was the same belief I had around my business. It was like, okay, I have to stop this. I have to end this. And then I just kept not ending it because I was so passionate about the business itself. So I would say that that's probably the number one most important component when you have a business that you're running with small children, is you got to want it really bad. You got to want it so bad, and you have to be so in love with and passionate about what you're doing that when you have a moment of, I can't do this anymore, just shoot me in the face, stab me in the face, it's over. Like that part of you just goes, yeah, we're not going anywhere. Like, okay, you can pretend like you're going to leave, but like the passion itself has you by its talons and it's not letting go. So I would say that that's probably the foundational piece, is when you're running a business with a small child, be madly, passionately in love with that business.
Wow. And I could see where I would get that belief too. It's just like, okay, when I have a child, like forget about it. Like my whole, everything is done. So I'm curious, just how do you structure your time?
Because of my personality type, I'm a very unstructured person by nature. And one of the good things is that having a child forced me to have more structure. I'm very willy-nilly. I'm very like, oh, I'll do that when I feel like it. And then I'm pulling rabbits out of hats in the 11th hour. What's great is that having this other thing that pulls my time and attention and resource means that I have a lot less of it to play around with. And that forces me to be way more conscientious of how I'm spending my time and resource. And I kind of created this little algorithm, which when you're talking about how do you have a business, how are you an entrepreneur and also have small children, one of the worst parts of it is that if you say, well, I just did this, and you start to talk about your personal experience, there's going to be probably everybody but one person out there that's going to say, well, but my situation is different. Right? Like my circumstances are different. I don't get to do that, right? Like I can't do that because my situation is over here as opposed to her situation, which is over there. What you have to have then, if you're going to give advice on this, is you have to have an algorithm as opposed to a very specific way of going about it. What I recognized is that all of my best work gets done in 2-hour chunks of focused time and attention. If I can have 2 straight hours of focused time and attention, then that's where my best creative work gets gets done. And that means that everything that I do when I'm structuring my time is an effort to create that block of 2 hours. Now, I can't do 1 hour. 1 hour doesn't work because it takes me at least 20 minutes, if not 30 minutes, just to ramp up. And if I can get more than 2 hours, awesome, right? Like 3 or 4 is, 2 is good, 3 is better, and 4 is ideal. But sometimes I don't get that. But if I get 2, I'm okay. I can do 2 at a time. Then it becomes an entire world or entire plan around how do I capture those 2 hours? Like, how do I get that 2 hour chunk? And anything that fights my being able to get that 2 hours goes in my liability column. And anything that allows me to get that 2 hour chunk goes in my asset column. And if you look at a lot of people who work full time, maybe for other people, do 40-hour work weeks, I think they've done like tons and tons of efficiency studies where they're trying to figure out just how much real work time happens in the workplace in 40 hours. And I think they said it's something like 16 hours every week. 16 really good, high quality hours of work happen in a 40-hour work week. So I know that when you're building a business, like the tendency is to work 80-hour weeks. You're like trying to do everything you can to get this business up and running. But if you can capture between 20 to 30 hours of really high quality focused work, you're actually probably doing pretty good. You're probably up there. Like if you make those hours count, you're probably up there with people who are working 40 hour, plus hours. 2 hours is your goal. Now, what are the kinds of things that go into a liability category? Well, for me, I don't have grandparents that can watch my child. Like I said, I don't have much of a relationship with my parents, and they live across the country. And then my in-laws, who are beautiful, lovely people, my mother-in-law has serious back issues, and so she can't lift a child. She can't lift a baby. So she actually hasn't been able to watch Piper at all. And so that means I have no grandparents to help me out. Now, a lot of people do have grandparents that will help them out. I have a friend who runs a multi-million-dollar business, and every Thursday night is grandma night. She has a 3-year-old that goes and spends the night with her grandmother every Thursday. And then I think her mother-in-law comes and picks up her daughter on a semi-regular basis. That's in her asset column, right? Like mother-in-law is part of her reclaiming as many 2-hour chunks as possible. And so I would see just how much 2-hour chunks I could get out of that mother-in-law. like, can I get 5 2-hour chunks from the mother-in-law? Can she give me that? So that would go in the asset. I have that in my liability category, though, because I don't have that ability. However, I'm from the West Coast, and I live in Western Pennsylvania now, and everything here feels just like ridiculously dirt cheap, including the childcare. We have very, very reasonably priced childcare. And so I have a babysitter that comes in between 14 and 20 hours a week to watch Piper. Well, that goes in my asset category. Like very reasonable childcare, that's definitely an asset. Now, somebody might live in San Francisco where, someplace in New York or someplace on the West Coast or whatever, where the childcare prices are astronomical. That would be in your liability. I'm not sure if you can hear, but Piper screaming in the background.
I did. It's so timely.
That's awesome.
Yeah. So anyway, that's the monster. She's actually being cared for right now. So that would go in that goes in my asset category, and that would go in somebody else's liability category. The other thing that if anybody's feeling like really depressed about their situation, I beg them to write those lists. If you can figure out anything that will give you 2 hours, put it in your asset.
I would say a nap would be considered in the asset column. A couple-hour nap.
Oh, that's totally in my asset. And Piper, we trained her very well, and also because of her disposition, she goes down to sleep so easy. She goes down for her naps like beautifully. She'll go, bye-bye, mommy, and wave me out of the room. That is a big fat asset for me, right? Like that's massively in my asset column. Well, somebody else, like their kid might be too old to take naps now, and that will be in their liability column. But I would say massive leverage point is if your child has the disposition for it at all, powering through training them to sleep consistently. Like she slept through the night since she was like 5 months old, I think. There was a great book. I wish I could remember the name of it, but there are lots of books out there that are really fantastic that will help you train your child to sleep through the night, your baby to sleep through the night. And getting them trained to go to bed and just know this is nighttime now and be really good sleepers is a massive leverage point, not only in reclaiming time, but also in, like, say, saving your relationship with your mate if you are married.
It's a lot of hard work up front, but if you can power through it and get through the emotional turmoil, it really pays dividends.
Yeah, so she goes to bed at 8:30. Now, I do coaching. I do life coaching, private coaching, and I have a couple Australian clients, and they don't start until 9 p.m., right? It's 9 p.m. my time, and it's sometimes 9 a.m., 11 a.m. their time. So she goes to bed on the dot at 8:30 p.m. and she wakes up at anywhere between 8 and 8:30 a.m. in the morning. And so I know that I have my entire evening if I want to like stack clients there. I know I have the evening, and I know that I have until about 8 or 8:30 to sleep. So, I stack it however I can. I just do as much time reclamation as possible in those 2-hour chunks. If I wanted to start writing a book, I started writing a book a little while ago, a couple months ago, where I was getting up pretty early, and I knew I had until 8:30. So I had between 6:30 a.m. and 8:30 to write that book. Now that meant that I had less time in the evening because I needed my sleep to work, but that was when I chose to do it because that was a creative time for me. So just being really flexible and working to get those 2-hour chunks, I would say, is one of the ways that I've created an algorithm where if something goes out of my asset column into my liability column, I just look to find another asset to get those 2-hour chunks.
My experience being a single dad for about 2 years and by myself in my own apartment, having my 2 boys who are about 1 and 3 at the time with me in the evenings, often regularly and on the weekends, what I decided to do is divide my time into focused type time and non-focused type time. And during the focused time, it would be like after they went to bed at night, before they got up in the morning, or, they're playing something that was occupying them for a chunk of time. I could focus on creative things like writing or putting together something creative. And then my non-focused time tasks, I could do them with my children around my feet or playing near me. They could be making noise. I wouldn't need to be like answering client emails or doing customer service where it's only like a 3 to 5 minute task. And what I actually did was I created a standing desk in my living room area, my living space, where I could stand up high and have my computer, my laptop up at about a standing level. I'm about 6'2", so it was a standing level where the kids couldn't reach it. I think my son did pull my hard drive down one time, which I was almost devastated. It crashed to the ground. But I had it set where they usually couldn't grab things or pull them off. And I would stand and do some of that non-focused type work for, a little bit of time. I wouldn't spend the whole evening doing it, but it would give me a little bit of flexibility to answer some emails and do some things, because I was also at the time working full time, in order to be able to spend time having them with me and also working at the same time. That's some of those principles I brought over with Piper, and my boys are a little older now, but with Piper as a young girl, young baby, I'm able to do some of that like non-focused stuff when she's in the room with me, and there's no one else to watch her and it's just me watching her. I can like set up tasks in order to pre-pace them to know that, okay, I'm not going to do this now because I'll know I'll be watching Piper for an hour later tonight when she's playing, and this will be a great thing to do during that time. So I'll do focus work now, and then I can do this like kind of busy work stuff that has to be done.
Yeah. If you have a brick and mortar business, you're actually probably going to have a bit of an easier time with having small children, because kids seem to be okay if you're busy. If you're like moving around, walking around, doing physical things, they seem to be a little more forgiving of that than they are if you're like, say, have an online business where you're staring at your computer screen. Like, all that is a challenge for them to get your attention. I mean, if you're an online entrepreneur and you're saying to yourself, this seems harder than it should be, you're accurate. Like, kids hate when you look at a computer screen. You have to sometimes have them around while you're looking at your computer screen. The whole concept of raising that computer screen and standing up, it gives the impression to the child that you're busy doing something physical, and they do get a little less insistent upon your attention than if you're like sitting down at a desk looking at the computer screen and then now they've thrown the gauntlet down. It's go time. I would say that that's really big. One thing I wanted to mention before too is that I'm trying to remember the name of it. It's very, very, very simple. I have a link on our website for the childcare that we use. There's an online service that basically connects mothers and people who are looking for childcare with childcare providers. And the mom or the person who's looking for childcare, it's a paid service for them, for all the people who are babysitters. It's a free service for them. I just went ahead and paid the fee. I don't remember how much it was. It was like $30 or $40 a month or something, but I just went ahead and paid the $30 or $40 for the month. I wrote an advertisement that was extremely authentic, meaning that I was very radically honest in it, and I knew that would get attention. I knew that the more honest I was, basically I wrote copy in this advertisement to get as high quality people as I could. And then I got all these responses for the area, and I staggered them in interviews at a Starbucks. I had like 7 or 8 interviews, and I staggered them with like every 45 minutes for a day. And I just went through, interviewed all these people, brought Piper and saw how they interacted and that sort of thing. And I got an absolutely phenomenal girl who comes in almost every day now and watches Piper here while I'm working. It's been a great, great arrangement. And I highly recommend doing something like that if you can. If you can swing the expense, if you can swing you can find that great person. And usually if you write a really solid advertisement for what you're looking for, those people will be attracted. I mean, like, I live in a very conservative area of Western Pennsylvania, and I totally painted myself as a super hippie, right? I'm not a hippie, but I knew that would be something, a concept they could relate to. And I painted myself as this like super granola hippie person just to kind of find somebody who would be into that vibe. If you want to find that link, you can go to our website, personalityhacker.com/childcare. So personalityhacker.com/childcare. Go to that website. I think it's care.com. That's what it's called, care.com. And go straight to them and find a really great person to give you some assistance, because you really can't do it on your own. But if you don't have somebody who's swooping in to like help you, you can pay for that service and get somebody to swoop in and help.
That's great. That's an interesting point you made about the copy that you wrote for your ad, because I know like whenever I am outsourcing for different jobs, the longer that I make my job ads and the more specific and the more like you're going to have to do this and this and this, the natural inclination would to think that you're going to overwhelm people. But usually it just ends up attracting all these A players who are like, thank you. You know, she knows exactly what she wants. And then I'm just like falling over myself with amazing candidates. So that's very cool that you did that.
If you know who you want and get a picture of that person, it's just like with advertising for your marketing. You've got an avatar in mind. Whatever you're outsourcing, who's that avatar? And write totally to them, and then you'll find them.
One more thing I just want to mention about kind of the working and then having a child. So if you're building a business or you've got some kind of business having a child, I think with kids, obviously they spell love, Time, like time is important. And so quantity of time. And I also believe that quality of time is important too. And so, one thing that if Piper is insistent on attention, and it's just not working out to get something done, in that kind of non-focused time where it's just something, first of all, make sure I'm spending time with her. It's important to me, regardless of work. Like I'm spending quality time with her. I spend time playing Tea Party or going down a slide or taking her to the park. We walk. Tony takes her on walks during the day. We go different places and do stuff with her. That's really key, I think, to buy yourself some of that other time that you can work. And then if she's really insistent on attention, I think at the point where we realize, okay, she just really needs attention, we stop what we're doing. We turn to her and we give her some of the attention she's asking for, demanding sometimes. And I think often that calms her down, and then she's able to be by herself and play a little bit, longer. If we can give her some quality attention and show her that, hey, we're still connected, we're still here with you. So it's important, I think, as you're going through day. I don't think this is something new to parents. They probably already get this, but this is something that's been important for us to kind of that work-life balance, because she's part of our business in a sense, because she's with us all the time. She's watching us build this business. It's kind of that experience for her. So she needs to be kind of part of our lives in the midst of the business building.
Mm. And one more thing I would tag on there, or piggyback on that, she's got a need that's going unmet. And so she's very insistent upon getting that need met, because she's a baby and babies don't have the social maturity to shut that valve up yet. But we've learned all sorts of ways to shut those insistent needs off. And I would say take a lesson from your child and start listening to yours, and make sure you're getting your needs met. Make sure that you're nourishing yourself. We have this like amazing morning smoothie that we do every morning, and we can tell when we haven't done it because we're grumpy bastards. But if we do it, then like the day goes so much better. So we make sure to nourish our bodies. We make sure we can. Now, sometimes a major project will come up. We're sleep deprived, but then we account for that by giving ourselves some rest days afterwards. That's the great thing about having your own business, is that you get to determine when your rest day is and when you don't, to some extent. Obviously you have to manage clients, but you have the luxury of setting things up so that if you have a need going unmet, you can address it. And check in, keep your finger on the pulse of your needs. Are you not getting enough exercise? Are you not eating the right foods? Is your relationship, if you're in a relationship, is your relationship needing some time and attention? Are you doing a lot of fighting and bickering? I think the real litmus test is, are you taking everything personally? Are you assuming that everything they're saying is somehow like meant to hurt your feelings? Well, if that's the case, you need to drop everything and go focus on that relationship for a while. And so make sure that you are getting your needs met, make sure that your relationships are getting their needs met, and give yourself permission to do that, because otherwise you're going to run on empty, and then eventually it doesn't matter how passionate you are about what you're doing, you will give up. Keep the passion burning by fueling yourself and making sure that you're not, sometimes we got to go the minimum, right? Sometimes you have to, just like with Piper, you're like, right now I'm busy, so I'm going to give you 10 minutes of concentrated time and then swat your butt and send you on your way. Sometimes we have to do that with our needs too. Like, I'm going to give you the minimum amount right now, but then we sort of tag that and go, okay, but later on, I'll make sure to make it up to you. I'll make sure to we'll do a full tea party with Piper, for like a full hour or whatever she wants to do. And then we'll make sure that she really, like, we've made it up to her. And do the same thing with yourself. If you can't at the moment do a full need met, do a truncated one, and then later on make it up to yourself.
I love it. I have like 800 other questions, like I keep saying, but I know that we're just past the hour, so I'm going to ask one other question, and then I'd love if you could tell people where to find you. But the last question is, because I want people who are listening to know that you guys are real humans with everyday struggles. Can you just let us know maybe something right now that you're currently working on in your life and how you're getting through it?
I came across very self-satisfied at the beginning of the podcast. I am in a situation right now where I am feeling more satisfied than I have in the past about where I'm at. But still, when you ask that question, I've got a bottleneck of all these things that I'm working on.
I can start with something pretty practical, or at least something specific as you're thinking, if you want to think
please.
for a moment. For me, I have a tendency to be an opportunity chaser, and I tend to say yes so often because I get excited. It's very easy to excite me about new ideas, new projects. And so one of the challenges that I'm trying to combat, well, it's twofold. It's taking on too much, and then also the tyranny of the urgent, that feeling like everything is urgent when I may be neglecting the important things in life or business. And I'm really consciously focused on trying to slow down and not say yes to so many things. In fact, say no to more things. I kind of have this feeling like my success, my personal business, and all that success is going to come from some of the things I say no to, even more so than the things I say yes to. And that's a big lesson I'm learning. And I'm not anywhere close to having finished this lesson of learning this. I'm on my journey. I'm on my way of really understanding that I can't please everybody. I can't do everything for everybody. I can't be everything to everybody. And it's not, and Antonia will say this, sometimes I'll be in the midst of 6 things I'm juggling. I'll be like, everybody wants something from me and I'm so frustrated. Why is this happening to me? And I'm like, pity me, poor me. And then I realize, after she gives me nice advice as well, I'm like, this is actually my doing. I took on all of this, and it's my responsibility to be more clear, set better boundaries, and work through this, and don't let it stack to where I explode, and then I'm putting all this emotional energy out toward my wife and my child and my friends or whatever. I'm more in charge of it before it gets to that place, and that's really a lesson I've got to struggle with all the time that I'm working on right now.
Yeah, I would say that. Thank you, by the way, for giving me an opportunity to think. I've got one for my business and one for my personal. In my business, I'm really trying to focus on making sure that I do as much input as output, because what I do is so much teaching and so much coaching that I'm in output so often. I've realized that I need to focus on making sure that I have as much input. So reading, learning new information, feeding my mind. And sometimes I'll use my childcare time to input. Sometimes I use my childcare time, I'll pay a babysitter to have me sit there and play video games for an hour because that's what I need in the moment. I need to just completely detox from whatever, maybe I got off of a huge program that I just put together or whatever, and I have to play video games for an hour. I just have to. And so I'll pay somebody to come in and watch my child while I play video games. So I'm giving myself more and more permission to do that. And then also, I'll just read. I'll listen to music and read while my child care provider's in. And I'll pay her to give me the opportunity to read and listen to music.
That's caused a little tension between us, I think, because I'm like, why are you playing video games? You have a babysitter. Let's work. Let's get stuff done.
Right. I'm really working hard on giving myself the thing that I need in the moment, recognizing that. I had a friend recently say, well, what if we made big change in the world, and what if we walked there instead of ran? And I was like, that is brilliant. So I'm trying to kind of think in terms of how do I make sure that I'm enjoying the ride, that I'm getting my need met, and I'm walking there as opposed to running. And sometimes I just get that need met. So I'm trying to really focus on inputting as much as I'm outputting on a business level. On a personal level, I have a tendency to believe that I only have value as a human being if I'm demonstrating it to other people by giving that value, by being the person who's and look at the amazing thing that I could teach you, or looking at the amazing concept that I have, or look at how awesome I am because look at the value I'm giving you. And that obviously comes from a fundamental insecurity that I show up without value. So in my personal life, I'm really working on recognizing that I have value just by existing, just by showing up, that my life is precious just because it is. And not having to constantly prove to other people how valuable I am, that just kind of going, okay, well, I'm here and that's valuable. And then also if I choose to give more value, then that's okay too. But it's not a compulsion. I would say that's my current personal development project, is making sure that I rest into intrinsic value as opposed to having to prove it all the time.
Those are awesome answers. Thank you so much. This has been great. And I'm so glad, for those of you listening, Joel decided, all of us decided last minute that Joel would be here on the podcast too. And I'm so glad, because I think it just made this fantastic. And hopefully we can have you guys back because you have so much to share. For the meantime, can you please tell people where they can go to learn more about you?
So our website is personalityhacker.com. So that's personality and then hacker, like HACKER.com. That's where you find our podcast, our blogs, our articles, online assessment that we give, and all of our programs are at that location. And then if you want to check out the childcare provider that I use, care.com, you can just go to /childcare. Personalityhacker.com /childcare.
Yeah, we'd love to meet you and have you come over and say hi to us.
Yeah.
So do it.
Awesome. Thank you guys again so much for being here. This was great.
Thank you, Rachel.
Thanks, Rachel.
Thank you so much for listening to A Better Life. You can find all show notes for this episode at rachelrofe.com. If you enjoyed this episode, subscribe right now so you can automatically get access to all new shows. Let's also connect. Just go onto Twitter, Facebook, or Instagram /RachelRofe and we can talk there. The opinions of all guests here are their own, and all information should be considered for entertainment purposes only.